Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is David Park, and I share real stories about business, betrayal, and the hard lessons I've learned along the way. Today's video is different from anything I've shared before. It's longer, darker, and more personal than usual. This is the story of how I built a multi-million-dollar real estate investment company from nothing, how my best friend and business partner destroyed it in a single calculated move, and how I spent 2 years methodically dismantling his entire life in revenge. It's also the story of how that revenge nearly destroyed me in the process. I'm not sharing this because I'm proud of everything I did. In fact, there are parts of this story that still keep me awake at night, actions I took that I can never undo. But I think there's value in honesty, in showing what really happens when betrayal turns into obsession, when hurt transforms into a consuming need for revenge. Before we start, I want to give you a content warning. This story involves financial fraud, manipulation, broken families, and the kind of calculated cruelty that comes from someone who's been pushed to their breaking point. If you're going through a betrayal right now and considering revenge, please watch this entire video before you make any decisions. Learn from my mistakes. Understand the real cost. All right, let's begin. This story starts 8 years ago in Miami, Florida, when I was 33 years old and had just closed the biggest deal of my career. Let me take you back to where this all started. 8 years ago, I was 33 years old, single, living in a studio apartment in Kendall, and working as a real estate agent for a mid-sized brokerage firm in Miami. I was making decent money, about $92,000 a year, but I was hungry for more. I'd grown up poor in Queens, New York, watching my parents work 3 jobs between them just to keep us afloat. I promised myself I'd never struggle like that. That's when I met Thomas Rodriguez. Tommy, as everyone called him, was 35 years old, married with 2 daughters, ages 7 and 4, and working at the same brokerage. He had this infectious energy and optimism that made you want to believe anything was possible. Where I was cautious and analytical, Tommy was bold and visionary. Where I saw risks, he saw opportunities. We met at a company conference in Orlando. We were both attending a workshop on commercial real estate investment, and we ended up sitting next to each other. During the lunch break, we started talking about our frustrations with working for someone else, about how we were making other people rich while staying in the same place ourselves. By the end of that lunch, we had sketched out a rough business plan on a napkin. The idea was simple. We would start our own real estate investment company focused on buying distressed commercial properties, renovating them, and either flipping them for quick profit or holding them for long-term rental income. Miami was perfect for this. The market was recovering from the 2008 crash. There were opportunities everywhere, and we both had the connections and expertise to make it work. Over the next 3 months, we met every weekend at a Starbucks in Coral Gables, refining our business plan, crunching numbers, and building our pitch deck. Tommy handled the big picture vision and investor relations strategy. I focused on the financial models and operational details. We complemented each other perfectly, or so I thought. We officially founded Skyline Properties Group in June of that year. We each put in $48,000 of our own savings as initial capital, everything I'd saved over 8 years of working. And for Tommy, money he'd been setting aside for his daughter's college funds. We were all in, betting everything on this dream. We set up the company as a 50-50 partnership, equal ownership, equal decision-making power, equal everything. We drafted partnership agreements with an attorney, but honestly, most of it felt like a formality. Tommy was my best friend by that point. We trusted each other completely. The legal documents were just paperwork to satisfy investors and banks. Looking back, that blind trust was my first mistake. But at the time, it felt like the foundation of our partnership. Trust, friendship, shared vision. What could possibly go wrong? For the first 3 years, everything went better than we could have imagined. Our first deal was a small office building in Hialeah, 12,000 square feet, completely run down, vacant for 18 months. We bought it for $390,000, spent $82,000 on renovations, and sold it 9 months later for $640,000. That first success gave us credibility. Suddenly, other investors wanted to hear our pitches. We raised our first round of outside capital, $2.1 million from 4 different investors, including a wealthy doctor Tommy knew from his wife's church and a retired businessman I'd sold a house 2 years earlier. We used that capital to acquire 3 more properties over the next year: a strip mall in Kendall, a warehouse in Doral, and a small mixed-use building in Coconut Grove. We developed a system. I handled the financial analysis, property selection, and contractor management. Tommy focused on investor relations, marketing, and deal sourcing. It worked beautifully. By year 2, we had completed 8 deals and had a portfolio worth approximately $7.3 million. We were making serious money. Each of us was taking home about $185,000 annually, plus profit shares from successful flips. More importantly, we were building real wealth. The equity we held in various properties was growing every month. By year 3, Skyline Properties Group was one of the most successful small real estate investment firms in South Florida. We had 15 active properties, a portfolio valued at over $19 million, and a reputation for finding opportunities others missed. I moved out of my studio apartment into a beautiful 3-bedroom condo in Brickell. Tommy bought his family a house in Coral Gables with a pool and a view of the golf course. But more than the financial success, what I valued most was the partnership itself. Tommy and I were like brothers. His daughters called me Uncle David. I spent holidays with his family. When his wife Lisa had surgery for a herniated disc, I was at the hospital with them. When my father passed away from a heart attack, Tommy flew with me to New York and stayed for the entire funeral, handling business calls from the parking lot so I could focus on my family. I trusted Tommy with everything: my business, my financial security, my secrets, my vulnerabilities. He knew about my failed engagement to Jennifer 3 years before we started the company, and how that betrayal had left me afraid to trust romantic partners. He knew about my fears of ending up like my parents, working until they died with nothing to show for it. He knew about my insomnia and anxiety, about the panic attacks I'd had during particularly stressful deals. I confided in Tommy about everything, and I thought he did the same with me. We spent 60 to 70 hours a week working together. We traveled together for property acquisitions and investor meetings, and we knew each other's schedules, routines, and personal lives intimately. We were partners in every sense of the word. What I didn't know was that Tommy had been planning to betray me from the very beginning. Or maybe he hadn't planned it initially, but at some point during those 3 years, he'd decided that 50% wasn't enough. He wanted it all, and he'd spent months figuring out exactly how to take it. The beginning of the end started with what should have been our greatest success. In month 41 of our partnership, I remember the exact timing because of everything that happened afterward. We found the opportunity we'd been waiting for: a distressed commercial property in downtown Miami, right in the heart of the financial district. It was a 12-story office building built in the 1980s, vacant for 2 years after the previous owner went bankrupt. The building needed significant work: new HVAC system, elevator modernization, complete interior renovation. But the location was perfect, and the price was unbelievable. The bank that held the mortgage wanted it off their books and was willing to sell for $4.8 million. The building's actual value, after renovations, would be somewhere between $12 and $15 million. This was our chance to make a massive leap forward. The profit potential was enormous, but we needed to move fast. The bank had received 3 other offers and wanted to close within 45 days. We needed to raise $7.2 million total. The purchase price plus renovation costs and operating capital for 18 months. Tommy and I split up the investor outreach. He took our existing investor network, the people who'd already made money with us on previous deals. I focused on new potential investors, people with serious capital who were looking for high-return opportunities. We worked around the clock for 3 weeks, making pitch after pitch, running the numbers repeatedly, showing everyone how this deal could multiply their investment by 3 times in less than 2 years. By day 38, we had commitments for $5.9 million. We were close, but not quite there. That's when Tommy came to me with exciting news. He'd found a new investor, a wealthy developer from Argentina named Carlos Mendez, who was looking to diversify his U.S. holdings. Carlos was willing to invest $2.5 million, which would not only cover our shortfall, but give us extra operating capital. There was one condition. Carlos wanted the deal structure to be cleaner. Instead of having dozens of small investors each with complex equity positions, He wanted Skyline Properties to act as the master entity, with him investing directly into the company rather than into the specific property. This would give him a stake in the overall company rather than just in the downtown tower project. I was hesitant about this structure. It meant giving up company equity rather than property-specific equity. But Tommy was persuasive. He pointed out that Carlos's $2.5 million would allow us to close other deals simultaneously, that having a major investor with a stake in the company would open doors, that this was the kind of strategic partnership that could take Skyline to the next level. More importantly, Tommy vouched for Carlos personally. He said he'd done extensive due diligence, that Carlos had a sterling reputation in Latin American real estate circles, that this was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. I trusted Tommy's judgment. We'd been partners for 3 years, we'd made each other wealthy, and he'd never steered me wrong before. So I agreed. We restructured the deal, brought Carlos in as a major investor with a 22% stake in Skyline Properties Group, and closed on the downtown tower on day 44. Tommy and I each saw our ownership percentage drop from 50% to 39%, but we figured it was worth it for the capital infusion and strategic partnership. I should have done my own due diligence on Carlos. I should have insisted on meeting him personally before the deal closed. I should have questioned why Tommy was so eager to bring in an investor who diluted our ownership. But I didn't. I trusted my partner, and that trust cost me everything. For the first 3 months after closing the downtown tower deal, everything seemed fine. The renovations were progressing on schedule, we'd already received commitments from 3 major tenants interested in leasing space, and our other properties were performing well. Tommy and I were both optimistic about the next phase of our company's growth. Then, on a Tuesday morning in November, I arrived at our office in Coconut Grove to find 2 men in dark suits waiting in the conference room. They introduced themselves as FBI agents specializing in financial crimes. They wanted to talk about Carlos Mendez and the $2.5 million investment he'd made in Skyline Properties. My blood went cold. The lead agent, Special Agent Martinez, laid out the situation. Carlos Mendez was under investigation for money laundering. The $2.5 million he'd invested in our company was suspected to be proceeds from illegal activities in Colombia and Venezuela. By accepting that investment, Skyline Properties Group was now implicated in a federal investigation. I told them the truth. That Tommy had brought Carlos in as an investor, that I'd never met Carlos personally, that I'd relied on Tommy's due diligence. The agents took notes but didn't seem particularly sympathetic. They explained that ignorance wasn't a defense, that we should have done proper KYC, know your customer, procedures on any major investor, that we were legally responsible for ensuring the source of funds was legitimate. They asked where Tommy was. I called him immediately, and he said he was at home sick with the flu. The agent said they'd visit him there. Before they left, Agent Martinez gave me his card and strongly suggested I get an attorney. He said the investigation was just beginning, but it was serious enough that I should be prepared for the possibility of criminal charges. I sat in that conference room for 20 minutes after they left, trying to process what had just happened. My company, our company, the thing Tommy and I had built from nothing, was under federal investigation. We could face criminal charges. We could lose everything. And it was all because of an investor Tommy had brought in, an investor he'd vouched for personally. I called Tommy repeatedly over the next hour, but he didn't answer. Finally, around 2 p.m., he called me back. I told him about the FBI visit, about the investigation, about how serious this was. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Tommy said something I'll never forget. "David, I'm sorry, but I need you to know, I had nothing to do with this. Carlos came to me through a mutual contact. I did standard due diligence. I didn't know about any of this." Something in his tone felt off. Too practiced, too calm for someone who should have been panicking about an FBI investigation. But I was too stressed to analyze it at that moment. I told him we needed to meet immediately with lawyers, that we needed to coordinate our response, that we were partners and would handle this together. Tommy agreed to meet the next morning, but he never showed up. And that's when everything started to unravel. Tommy and I had agreed to meet at our office at 8 a.m. Wednesday morning. I arrived at 7:45 with coffee and bagels, ready for what I knew would be a long, difficult day of crisis management. At 8:15, Tommy hadn't shown up. I called him. It went straight to voicemail. I called his house phone, no answer. I texted him, no response. By 9 a.m., I was genuinely worried. Tommy had never ghosted me before, not in 3 years of partnership. I called Lisa, his wife. She picked up on the fourth ring and sounded strange, her voice tight and formal in a way I'd never heard before. Lisa, is Tommy okay? We were supposed to meet an hour ago and he's not answering. There was a long pause. Then she said, David, Tommy asked me to tell you that he's taking some time to think. He said you'd understand why. I didn't understand at all. We were in crisis mode, facing a federal investigation, and my partner was taking time to think? I asked Lisa if I could come by the house to talk to him. She said no, that Tommy had specifically asked her to tell me he needed space. Then she hung up. I spent the rest of that day trying to reach Tommy through every possible channel. I called his brother, his father, his closest friends. Nobody had heard from him. Or if they had, they weren't telling me. It felt like he'd vanished into thin air, and with him went any chance of presenting a united front to the investigators. That afternoon, I hired an attorney, Robert Chen, a criminal defense lawyer who specialized in white-collar crime. Robert was expensive. He quoted me $15,000 as a retainer just to get started, but he came highly recommended. I met with him for 2 hours, laying out everything I knew about the Carlos Mendez investment and the FBI investigation. Robert asked me detailed questions about Tommy's relationship with Carlos, about who had done the due diligence, about what documentation existed. And that's when I realized something horrifying. I'd never actually seen any due diligence documents. Tommy had assured me he'd done the background checks, verified Carlos's credentials, confirmed the source of funds was legitimate. But I'd never asked to see the actual paperwork. I just trusted him. Robert's expression grew grimmer as I talked. Finally, he said, David, I need to be straight with you. If there's no documentation of proper due diligence and if the source of those funds was indeed illegal, you're looking at potential charges of money laundering. The fact that you claim you didn't know doesn't mean much legally. You're a 50-50 partner in this company. The law holds you equally responsible for what the company does. I left Robert's office in a daze. This couldn't be happening. 3 years of work, everything I'd built, my entire financial future. All of it at risk because Tommy had brought in one bad investor. Except it wasn't just bad luck, and I was about to find out exactly how bad it really was. On Thursday morning, I received an email from our corporate attorney, Michelle Sanders. The subject line read, Urgent, emergency board meeting called. My stomach dropped. We didn't have a formal board. It was just Tommy and me as the two partners. Who had called an emergency meeting? I opened the email. It was from Michelle, but she was writing on behalf of Carlos Mendez and Thomas Rodriguez. They had invoked a clause in our operating agreement that allowed shareholders holding at least 20% ownership to call emergency meetings in cases of potential legal or financial crisis. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. at Michelle's law office. I called Michelle immediately. What the hell is going on? She sounded uncomfortable. David, I can't discuss the agenda with you before the meeting. I'm representing the company, not any individual shareholder. You should bring your own attorney. I asked her if she knew where Tommy was. She said she couldn't discuss that either. The formality in her voice told me everything I needed to know. Something was very, very wrong. I showed up to that Friday meeting with Robert Chen. We arrived 10 minutes early and waited in Michelle's conference room. At exactly 2 p.m., the door opened and Tommy walked in, followed by a man I'd never met, presumably Carlos Mendez and 2 other attorneys I didn't recognize. Tommy wouldn't make eye contact with me. That's when I knew. Whatever was about to happen, he was part of it. This wasn't Tommy being scared or confused about the FBI investigation. This was something he'd planned. Michelle called the meeting to order and got straight to the point. On behalf of Thomas Rodriguez and Carlos Mendez, collectively holding 61% of Skyline Properties Group, she was presenting a motion to remove me as managing partner and operator of the company, effective immediately. The grounds: my failure to conduct proper due diligence on major investments, my reckless decision-making that had exposed the company to federal investigation, and my breach of fiduciary duty to shareholders. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tommy brought Carlos in. I relied on his due diligence. You were there. I looked directly at Tommy for the first time. He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. There was no guilt, no confusion, no conflict. Just cold calculation. One of the other attorneys, a woman named Patricia Stone, spoke up. She represented Carlos Mendez. She laid out a different version of events. According to documents she presented, I had been the one to initiate contact with Carlos. I had been the one to push for his investment despite Tommy's concerns. I had been the one to skip proper due diligence procedures because I was desperate to close the downtown tower deal. It was all lies. Elaborate, documented lies. There were emails with my name on them that I'd never sent. There were memos supposedly written by me that I'd never seen before. There was a paper trail that made it look like I'd been the driving force behind Carlos's investment, while Tommy had expressed concerns that were documented in writing. Robert objected, pointing out that the documents were clearly fabricated, that I'd never even met Carlos Mendez before today. But Michelle shut him down, saying we could contest the authenticity later. But for now, a vote was being called. Tommy and Carlos collectively held 61%. They voted to remove me. The motion passed, but they weren't done. Patricia handed me a second set of documents. Skyline Properties Group was filing a lawsuit against me personally, seeking damages for my negligence and breach of duty. They were also exercising a buyout clause in our operating agreement, offering to purchase my 39% stake in the company for $950,000, a fraction of what it was actually worth. I had 48 hours to accept the buyout or face a prolonged legal battle. If I chose to fight, they would freeze my access to company funds, suspend my salary, and make it impossible for me to earn income while the case was pending. The message was clear. Take the lowball buyout and walk away, or they would destroy me financially through legal fees and lost income. Tommy finally spoke. His voice was eerily calm. David, I'm sorry it came to this, but you made decisions that put everyone at risk. The company needs to move forward without you. I stared at him. This man I'd called my best friend. This man I'd trusted with everything, and I didn't recognize him. As I left that conference room, my mind was reeling. Tommy hadn't just betrayed me. He'd orchestrated an elaborate scheme to steal my company. The FBI investigation, the fabricated documents, the buyout offer, it had all been planned. And I'd walked right into it. I had 48 hours to decide whether to accept the buyout or fight. Robert Chen laid out my options clearly. Fighting would mean years of litigation, hundreds of thousands in legal fees, and no guarantee of winning. The fabricated documents were sophisticated, and Tommy had clearly been planning this for months. Even if I could eventually prove the fraud, I'd be financially devastated by the time I won. But accepting the buyout meant letting Tommy win. It meant walking away from the company I'd built, taking less than 15% of what my stake was actually worth, and letting him steal 3 years of my life and work. The $950,000 offer was an insult. My 39% stake was worth at least $6 million based on conservative valuations. I spent those 48 hours doing something Robert didn't advise. I investigated. I couldn't accept what Tommy had done without understanding exactly how he'd done it. I needed to see the full picture of his betrayal before I could decide how to respond. I started with Carlos Mendez. Who was he really? I hired a private investigator, a former Miami PD detective named Marcus Williams, who specialized in financial investigations. I gave him Carlos's name and the limited information I had. Within 12 hours, Marcus called me back with preliminary findings. Carlos Mendez existed, but he wasn't a wealthy Argentine developer. He was a small-time real estate agent in Fort Lauderdale with minimal assets and no capacity to invest $2.5 million in anything. The Carlos who showed up at that board meeting was an actor, someone Tommy had hired to play the role. The real Carlos had no idea his identity had been used in this scheme. This revelation changed everything. There was no FBI investigation. Tommy had hired people to impersonate federal agents. The money laundering story was complete fiction. Tommy had used my fear of legal consequences to panic me while he executed his takeover of the company. But where did the $2.5 million come from? Marcus dug deeper and found the answer. Tommy had secretly secured a line of credit using company assets as collateral, without my knowledge or signature. He'd forged my consent on the loan documents. He'd then used that money to invest in the company as Carlos, giving himself majority control without actually putting up any of his own capital. The fabricated emails and memos in my name? Tommy had access to my computer and email account. We'd always shared passwords as partners. It was part of our trust. He'd created those documents himself, using my login credentials to make them look authentic. The timestamps all checked out because they'd been created from my actual accounts. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't an opportunistic betrayal. Tommy had been planning this for at least 6 months, maybe longer. He'd been systematically setting up the infrastructure for stealing the company while still pretending to be my best friend and partner. Marcus estimated that Tommy had spent approximately $300,000 setting up the scheme, hiring the actors, forging documents, creating the fake FBI investigation scenario. He'd invested that much because he knew the payoff would be massive. Sole control of a company worth over $20 million in assets. But Marcus found something else during his investigation. Something Tommy didn't know I'd discovered. While digging into Tommy's finances, Marcus found evidence of other secrets, other lies that had nothing to do with the business betrayal. Tommy had been having an affair. For the past 14 months, he'd been involved with a woman named Rebecca Stone, a real estate attorney in Fort Lauderdale who'd handled several of our property transactions. Marcus found hotel receipts, credit card statements from restaurants, and rental car records that painted a clear picture of their relationship. But it got worse. Tommy had been funneling company money to support this affair. He'd created fake vendor invoices for consulting services that were actually payments to Rebecca. He'd expensed personal trips with her as business travel. Over 14 months, he'd stolen approximately $230,000 from Skyline Properties to fund his double life. This was separate from his theft of the company itself. This was old-fashioned embezzlement, hidden behind legitimate-looking transactions. Lisa, his wife, had no idea. His daughters had no idea. I'd had no idea, even though Tommy and I reviewed every financial transaction together, or so I thought. He'd clearly been manipulating the books for over a year. Marcus found one more thing that made my blood boil. Remember how I mentioned Tommy had used his daughter's college fund money as his initial capital for starting Skyline? That was a lie. Tommy had never put a single dollar of his own money into the company. The $48,000 he claimed was his investment had actually come from a personal loan from his father-in-law, Lisa's dad, who'd believed Tommy was investing in a sure thing. Tommy had never repaid that loan. His father-in-law, Antonio Vasquez, was a retired teacher living on a fixed income. That $48,000 represented almost everything he'd saved for his retirement. Tommy had promised to pay him back within 3 years, with interest. But now, 4 years later, Antonio had received nothing, and Tommy had stopped taking his calls. Sitting in my apartment that Friday night, reading through Marcus's investigation report, I felt something shift inside me. The shock and hurt were transforming into something colder, harder. Tommy hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed everyone who'd ever trusted him. His wife, his children, his father-in-law, me. He was a fraud in every aspect of his life, and suddenly, I knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going to fight him in court. I wasn't going to accept his insulting buyout offer. I was going to destroy him, systematically and completely, using every secret I'd uncovered. I was going to take everything from him, just as he'd tried to take everything from me. This wouldn't be justice. It would be revenge. I need to be honest about this moment, because this is where I made the choice that would define the next 2 years of my life and change me in ways I'm still dealing with today. I had evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. I could have gone to the police, could have fought Tommy through legal channels, could have pursued justice the right way, but I didn't want justice. I wanted revenge. I wanted Tommy to feel the same shock, betrayal, and devastation I was feeling. I wanted him to lose everything he valued, to sit alone in the ruins of his life and know that I'd done it to him. I wanted him to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't destroy someone without being destroyed in return. Robert Chen had warned me about the revenge path. He'd said, David, I understand you're angry, but if you go down that road, you won't just hurt him. You'll hurt yourself. Revenge has a cost, and it's always higher than people think it'll be. I thanked him for his advice and then ignored it completely. That Saturday morning, 47 hours after the ultimatum, I called Michelle Sanders, the corporate attorney. I told her I'd accept the buyout, but I had one condition. I wanted a clean break with no ongoing obligations or liabilities. She agreed to draft the documents, and we scheduled a signing for Monday morning. Tommy probably thought he'd won. He'd stolen my company for a fraction of its value and successfully scared me into walking away without a fight. What he didn't know was that I'd spent the weekend planning something far worse than a legal battle. I was going to systematically dismantle every aspect of his life, starting with the things he valued most. I made a list, yes, an actual written list, of everything Tommy cared about. His marriage to Lisa, his relationship with his daughters, his reputation in the real estate community, his new control of Skyline Properties, his financial security, his sense of himself as a good person, a good father, a good husband. I was going to take all of it, piece by piece. I had advantages Tommy didn't know about. I had Marcus's investigation report with all of Tommy's secrets documented. I had 3 years of intimate knowledge of Tommy's life, his passwords, his routines, his relationships, his vulnerabilities. I had copies of company financial records that showed his embezzlement, and I had nothing left to lose. That last part was important. When you've lost everything, when someone has already taken your dreams and burned them to ash, you become dangerous in a way comfortable people can't match. I wasn't constrained by fear of consequences anymore. Tommy had already delivered the worst possible consequence. Anything I did from here on out couldn't hurt me more than I was already hurting. I spent the next 2 weeks planning with the same methodical attention to detail I'd once applied to property investments. Every action would be calculated. Every move would serve a purpose. This wouldn't be emotional or reactive. It would be surgical. Phase 1 would target his marriage. I would expose the affair with Rebecca Stone in a way that would devastate Lisa and make reconciliation impossible. I knew Lisa. She'd been my friend too. She was deeply religious, active in their church, and had strong views about infidelity. She'd told me once about her father's affair and how it destroyed her parents' marriage, how she'd never forgive someone who cheated. Phase 2 would destroy his reputation in the real estate community. I would release evidence of his embezzlement from Skyline Properties. The theft would make him untouchable. No legitimate investor or partner would work with him once they knew he'd been stealing from his own company. Phase 3 would target Skyline Properties itself. Without me, Tommy would struggle to manage operations. I'd been the one handling financial analysis, property management, and contractor relationships. I knew which deals were problematic, which tenants were about to default, which properties had hidden issues. I would use that knowledge to accelerate the company's collapse. Phase 4 would be financial destruction. I would expose his unpaid debt to Antonio, his father-in-law. I would leak information about ongoing investigations to real authorities, forcing him to spend money on lawyers to defend against actual charges instead of the fake FBI investigation he'd created. I would make it impossible for him to maintain his lifestyle, to keep the house in Coral Gables, to provide for his daughters the way he'd promised. The final phase didn't have a timeline. It would be whatever was necessary to leave Tommy with nothing, to make him understand that betraying someone who trusted you completely isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. To ensure he spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering when the next blow would fall. Looking back now, I can see how dark my thinking had become. I was planning to destroy not just Tommy, but everything connected to him. His wife would suffer. His daughters would suffer. His father-in-law would suffer. People who worked at Skyline Properties would lose their jobs when the company collapsed. Innocent people would pay the price for my revenge against Tommy. But at that moment, I didn't care. I told myself they were acceptable collateral damage. Tommy had brought this on himself, and anyone who got hurt was really getting hurt because of his choices, not mine. I was just the instrument of consequence, the universe's way of correcting his wrongs. That's how revenge works. You build elaborate justifications for doing things you know are wrong. You convince yourself that you're serving justice when really you're just inflicting pain. You tell yourself you'll feel better once it's done, once they've suffered enough. You're lying to yourself, but you believe it because you need to believe it. I started with the affair because I knew it would hurt the most. Not just Tommy, Lisa would be devastated, and that was part of my calculation. If Lisa was hurt and angry, she'd be less likely to stand by Tommy when the other revelations came out. I needed to isolate him, to remove his support system before launching the full assault. Marcus's investigation had provided hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and rental car records spanning 14 months. But I wanted more than just evidence. I wanted something visceral and undeniable. So I hired Marcus for one more job. Get photos of Tommy and Rebecca together in a compromising situation. Marcus was uncomfortable with this assignment. He said, "David, investigating financial fraud is one thing. Following a guy around to catch him cheating feels like I'm helping you hurt his wife more than him." I told him that Lisa deserved to know the truth, that she had a right to know her husband was lying to her. Marcus accepted the job, but I could tell he wasn't happy about it. It took 11 days. Tommy and Rebecca met every Thursday afternoon at a Marriott in Boca Raton, always the same room, Suite 812. They'd arrive separately, him at 2:30 p.m., her at 2:45 p.m. They'd leave separately around 5:30 p.m. The pattern was so consistent it was almost comical. They thought they were being careful, but routines make you predictable. Marcus got photos of them entering the hotel separately, meeting in the lobby with a kiss, walking to the elevator together hand in hand. He got photos of them having dinner in the hotel restaurant, looking at each other with obvious intimacy. He got photos of them exiting the hotel together 4 hours later, Tommy's hand on the small of Rebecca's back. The photos were exactly what I needed, undeniable proof of an ongoing affair. But I didn't want to just show them to Lisa privately. I wanted everyone in Tommy's life to know simultaneously. I wanted the revelation to be public and humiliating, to make it impossible for him to control the narrative or manipulate the situation. I created anonymous email accounts and sent the photos to multiple people. Lisa, obviously, but also Tommy's parents, Lisa's parents, their closest friends from church, several colleagues in the real estate community who knew Tommy as a family man. I sent over 40 emails in total, each with a timestamp showing they were sent simultaneously at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I included a brief note with each email. Thomas Rodriguez has been having an affair with Rebecca Stone, an attorney at Morrison & Associates, for over a year. The attached photos were taken last Thursday. His family and friends deserve to know the truth about who he really is. Simple, direct, devastating. The timing was deliberate. Tommy would be at Skyline's office when Lisa received the email. His parents would get it while having breakfast. The church friends would see it as they checked email during their morning routines. By 9:30 a.m., Tommy's phone would be exploding with calls and messages, and he'd have no idea what was happening or how to contain it. I watched it unfold from my apartment. I couldn't see Tommy's actual reactions, but I could track the spread of information through mutual connections. By 10 a.m., one of our former employees posted a vague message on social media about being disappointed in people you thought you knew. By noon, the real estate community's group chat, one I'd been removed from but still had access to through a friend's account, was buzzing with speculation about Tommy's marriage troubles. Lisa called me that afternoon. I wasn't sure if she would. We hadn't spoken since the business blow-up. But when I saw her name on my phone, I knew exactly why she was calling. I answered, and before I could say hello, she asked, "Did you send those emails?" I could have lied. But I wanted her to know. I wanted Tommy to know eventually that I was responsible for destroying his marriage. So I said yes. There was a long silence. Then Lisa said, "Thank you." Her voice was shaking, on the edge of breaking completely. I needed to know. I suspected something, but he kept denying it, and I wanted to believe him because of the girls. She told me that Tommy had come home for lunch, unusual for him, and walked into the house to find her crying at the kitchen table with the photos spread out in front of her. He'd tried to explain, to minimize, to claim the photos were from years ago before they were married. But the timestamps were clear, and there were too many photos spanning too many different occasions. Lisa said she'd asked him one question. "How long?" And Tommy had finally admitted it had been going on for over a year. She'd told him to pack a bag and leave. He'd tried to argue, to promise to end it, to beg for another chance. But Lisa was done. She'd called her father, and Antonio was driving over to make sure Tommy actually left. Then Lisa said something that cut through my satisfaction. "The girls are crying. They don't understand why Daddy is leaving. Emma asked me if it's her fault." Emma was Tommy's younger daughter, 6 years old. The satisfaction I'd felt evaporated instantly, replaced by something sour and uncomfortable, but I pushed that feeling down. This was Tommy's fault, not mine. He'd chosen to have an affair. He'd chosen to lie to his wife and children. I was just revealing the truth. The pain his daughters were feeling was because of his actions, not mine. That's what I told myself anyway. Lisa asked me why I'd sent the emails to so many people beyond just her. Why did Tommy's parents need to know? Why did their church friends need to see the photos? I told her the truth. Because I wanted everyone to know what kind of man he really is. I wanted him to lose more than just his marriage. I wanted him to lose everything. Another long silence. Then Lisa said, "David, what he did to you was wrong. Taking the company, the lies, all of it. But this, hurting my daughters to hurt him, that's wrong too." She hung up before I could respond. I sat with my phone in my hand, staring at the wall. Lisa was right, and I knew it. But I couldn't stop now. I'd set something in motion, and it needed to run its course. Tommy needed to pay for what he'd done, and if that meant his daughters got hurt in the process, then that was the price of his betrayal. This was his fault. All of it. I was just the consequence. The affair exposure had immediate effects. Tommy moved out of his family home and into a small apartment in Brickell. His church friends stopped inviting him to their gatherings. His parents, who were devout Catholics, were mortified by the public nature of the scandal. But he still had the company. He still had control of Skyline Properties. That was next. I waited 3 weeks before making my next move. I wanted Tommy to think the affair exposure was a one-time act of anger, not the beginning of a sustained campaign. I wanted him to start feeling safe again, to start believing he could salvage his professional reputation even if his personal life was in shambles. During those 3 weeks, I carefully documented every piece of evidence Marcus had gathered about Tommy's embezzlement. The fake vendor invoices, the personal expenses disguised as business travel, the payments to Rebecca that were labeled as consulting fees. All told, Tommy had stolen approximately $230,000 from Skyline Properties over 14 months. But I didn't want to just report this to authorities or file a civil lawsuit. That would be too slow, too procedural. I wanted immediate, devastating impact on his reputation. So I created a comprehensive report. 48 pages of documented theft with bank statements, credit card records, receipts, and timeline analysis. It read like a forensic accounting investigation because that's essentially what it was. I sent this report anonymously to 3 groups of people. First, to all of Skyline's investors, the people who'd trusted Tommy with their capital. Second, to the Florida Real Estate Commission, the regulatory body that licensed and disciplined real estate professionals. Third, to every real estate attorney, broker, and investment firm that Tommy might want to do business with in the future. The report was titled Financial Fraud at Skyline Properties Group, A Pattern of Theft and Embezzlement by Thomas Rodriguez. I included a cover letter. The attached documentation reveals systematic theft of company funds by Thomas Rodriguez, managing partner of Skyline Properties. Mr. Rodriguez used his position to embezzle over $230,000, which he used to fund an extramarital affair and personal expenses. This information is being shared in the interest of protecting the Miami real estate community from future fraud. The response was swift and catastrophic for Tommy. Within 48 hours of sending the report, 3 of Skyline's major investors demanded emergency meetings. They wanted their money back immediately. One of them, the retired businessman who'd invested $850,000, threatened to file criminal charges personally if he didn't receive full repayment within 30 days. The Florida Real Estate Commission opened an investigation. Tommy received an official notice that his license was under review pending the outcome of their inquiry into allegations of financial misconduct. If they found the allegations credible, he could lose his real estate license permanently. But the most immediate impact was on his reputation. The report spread through Miami's real estate community like wildfire. Tommy's phone and email were flooded with messages from colleagues asking if the allegations were true, from potential business partners backing out of deals, from banks and lenders questioning whether they wanted to continue working with Skyline Properties. Within 1 week, Tommy went from being a respected real estate investor to being a pariah in his own industry. Nobody wanted to be associated with someone accused of embezzlement, especially when the evidence was so thoroughly documented. His professional network, the thing he'd built over 10 years, evaporated almost overnight. The investor panic created a financial crisis for Skyline Properties. Tommy had to scramble to find cash to pay back investors who were demanding their money. But the company's assets were tied up in properties. You can't just sell a commercial building overnight. He was forced to take out emergency loans at terrible interest rates, using company properties as collateral. Meanwhile, I'd been implementing Phase 3 quietly. I'd maintained friendships with several of Skyline's contractors, property managers, and key service providers. These were people I'd worked with for 3 years, people who respected me professionally. I started feeding them information about Skyline's financial instability, suggesting they might want to demand advance payment for services or consider working with other clients. I knew which properties had problems that I'd been managing carefully. The warehouse in Doral had a tenant whose lease was up for renewal. I reached out to that tenant and connected them with a competing landlord who offered better terms. The tenant left, creating a $63,000 annual revenue hole in Skyline's budget. The strip mall in Kendall had been showing its age. I'd been quietly managing deferred maintenance issues to keep costs down. I knew the roof needed replacement within 18 months, but I'd been planning the timing carefully to minimize tenant disruption. Now that I was gone, nobody was monitoring that issue. During a heavy rainstorm in September, the roof developed multiple leaks, causing water damage to 3 stores. Those tenants sued for damages and broke their leases. I didn't cause these problems. They were inherent risks of property ownership that I'd been managing proactively. But now Tommy was managing them alone, without my expertise, while also dealing with investor pressure, financial scrutiny, and his license being under review. He couldn't keep up. Problems that I would have caught early and fixed cheaply were becoming expensive crises. The downtown tower, our flagship property, the one that was supposed to make us millions, was bleeding money. Without me there to oversee renovations, contractors were overcharging and under-delivering. Tommy had fired the general contractor I'd selected, thinking he could manage it himself or find someone cheaper. The new contractor was cutting corners, and the quality of work was suffering. 2 of the 3 major tenants who'd been interested in leasing space pulled out after seeing the construction quality. I watched all of this unfold through various sources: mutual contacts in the industry, public records, and occasional updates from people who didn't know I was the one orchestrating Tommy's downfall. Every piece of bad news gave me a dark satisfaction. This was working. Tommy was losing control of the company he'd stolen from me, and he was drowning in problems he didn't have the skills to solve. By month 6 of my revenge campaign, Skyline Properties Group was in freefall. Tommy had managed to pay back 2 of the panicking investors, but only by taking on crushing debt. He'd leveraged almost every property the company owned to secure loans at terrible interest rates, sometimes 12 or 14% when we'd previously been getting 4 to 5%. The downtown tower had become a money pit. The renovation was supposed to cost $3.2 million and take 15 months. 7 months in, Tommy had already spent $4.7 million, and the building was maybe 60% complete. The timeline had stretched to at least 22 months, maybe longer. Every delay meant more carrying costs, more interest on loans, more months without rental income. I learned all this through various channels: public records, mutual acquaintances, and one particularly useful source: Tommy's divorce attorney's paralegal, who happened to be dating a guy I'd gone to college with. The divorce proceedings required Tommy to disclose all his financial information, and some of that information made its way back to me through this connection. Lisa was seeking full custody of their daughters and demanding significant child support. Tommy's attorney had tried to argue that his financial situation was temporary, that Skyline Properties was worth tens of millions and he'd be back on his feet soon. But Lisa's attorney had hired a forensic accountant who laid bare the reality. Skyline was deeply insolvent, hemorrhaging money every month, and likely headed for bankruptcy. The Florida Real Estate Commission's investigation had concluded. They'd found evidence of financial misconduct. The embezzlement was well documented, and Tommy had no credible defense. His real estate license was suspended for 2 years, with the possibility of permanent revocation if any additional misconduct was discovered. He couldn't legally operate as a real estate professional in Florida. He couldn't manage properties, couldn't broker deals, couldn't do the work that had been his entire career. Tommy had tried to hire other licensed professionals to run operations while he controlled things behind the scenes, but nobody wanted to attach their license to a sinking ship. The remaining investors were threatening lawsuits. Tenants were complaining about deteriorating properties and poor management. Contractors were demanding payment up front because Tommy's credit was shot. I should have felt triumphant. This was exactly what I'd wanted. Tommy's professional life completely destroyed. His company collapsing under the weight of his own incompetence and the problems I'd strategically engineered. But something was changing in me. The satisfaction I'd felt initially was fading, replaced by something hollow and uncomfortable. I found myself obsessively checking for updates on Tommy's situation. I'd spend hours reading through court filings from the divorce case, looking at public records of new liens against Skyline's properties, searching for any mention of Tommy or the company online. It was consuming my life in a way I hadn't anticipated. The revenge had become an addiction, and I needed constant confirmation that he was still suffering. In month 7, I played my final card. I'd been holding on to one piece of information, the proof that the entire Carlos Mendez investment was fraudulent, that Tommy had forged my signature on loan documents, that the FBI investigation had been completely fake. I'd kept this hidden because I wanted to time it for maximum impact. I compiled all of Marcus's investigation findings into another comprehensive report. This one was titled Criminal Fraud by Thomas Rodriguez, Forgery, Identity Theft, and Conspiracy. It detailed how Tommy had hired actors to impersonate FBI agents, how he'd created a fake investor to take control of the company, how he'd forged my signature on legal documents. But this time, I didn't send it anonymously to colleagues and investors. I sent it directly to the actual FBI's Miami field office, to the Florida State Attorney's Office, and to the Miami-Dade Police Department's fraud division. This wasn't about reputation anymore. This was about putting Tommy in actual legal jeopardy. The response was swift. Within 2 weeks, Tommy was contacted by real federal investigators, actual FBI agents, not the actors he'd hired. They wanted to interview him about allegations of bank fraud, forgery, and wire fraud. The forged signatures on loan documents were particularly serious. That was a federal crime with potential prison time. Tommy hired a criminal defense attorney, an expensive one that he couldn't afford. The legal fees started at $50,000 just as a retainer. He had to borrow money from his parents to pay it. His parents, who were already devastated by the affair scandal and disappointed by his business failures, now had to mortgage their retirement home to help their son avoid federal prison. The criminal investigation meant Skyline Properties was essentially dead. No investor would put money into a company whose principal owner was under federal investigation for fraud. No bank would extend credit. No tenant wanted to sign a lease with a landlord who might be going to prison. The company that Tommy had stolen from me was now worthless. In month 8, Skyline Properties Group filed for bankruptcy. Chapter 7. Liquidation, not reorganization, but complete dissolution. All assets would be sold to pay creditors. Investors would lose most of their money. The downtown tower that was supposed to be our crowning achievement would be sold at auction for a fraction of what we'd invested in it. Tommy had lost everything. His marriage, his family, his company, his reputation, his career, his financial security. He was living in a studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, driving a 12-year-old Honda because his leased BMW had been repossessed, working as a part-time consultant for a small property management company that paid him $32,000 a year. Barely enough to cover child support and basic living expenses. I'd accomplished everything I set out to do. Tommy had been completely destroyed. He'd lost more than he'd taken from me. Justice had been served, or so I told myself. So why didn't I feel better? Why did the victory feel so hollow? Month 9 was when I started to truly understand what revenge had cost me. Not Tommy. Me. Because while I'd been methodically destroying Tommy's life, my own life had been falling apart in ways I hadn't fully registered until the revenge was complete. I hadn't worked since accepting the buyout. The $950,000 had seemed like a decent amount, but after paying Robert Chen's legal fees, paying Marcus for his investigation work, covering my living expenses for 9 months, and spending money on various aspects of the revenge campaign, I'd burned through almost $400,000. My savings were depleting rapidly, and I had no income. But more importantly, I hadn't even looked for work. Every day had been consumed by tracking Tommy's downfall, planning the next phase of destruction, obsessively monitoring his situation. I'd spent 9 months doing nothing but destroying someone else instead of building anything for myself. The revenge had become my full-time job, my only purpose, my entire identity. My relationships had suffered. I'd cut off most of my friendships because I couldn't talk about what I was doing, and I didn't trust myself not to reveal what I was planning. The few friends who still reached out, I pushed away with vague excuses about being busy. I dated occasionally, but I couldn't maintain any romantic relationship because I was emotionally unavailable, consumed by my obsession with Tommy. My physical health had deteriorated. I'd lost 28 pounds, not from healthy eating and exercise, but from forgetting to eat, from stress, from sleeping poorly. I had constant headaches. My resting heart rate had increased from a healthy 65 to over 90. I was having chest pains that I told myself were just anxiety, but that probably required medical attention I wasn't seeking. My mental state was even worse. I couldn't concentrate on anything that wasn't related to Tommy. I'd start watching a movie, and within 10 minutes, I'd be on my laptop, checking public records or reading court documents. I'd try to read a book and find myself spacing out, replaying conversations with Tommy, imagining how he must be feeling knowing I'd destroyed him. I was having intrusive thoughts constantly, violent fantasies about confronting Tommy, nightmares about him finding out I was behind everything and coming after me, anxiety dreams about the revenge backfiring somehow. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, convinced that I'd forgotten to cover some track, that Tommy would figure out I was responsible and retaliate. One night, I was lying in bed unable to sleep, and I had a sudden moment of clarity that terrified me. I'd become exactly like Tommy. He'd been willing to destroy me to get what he wanted. I'd been willing to destroy him, and everyone connected to him, to get my revenge. His daughters were suffering because of choices I'd made. Lisa was struggling as a single mother because I'd intentionally destroyed their marriage. Tommy's parents had mortgaged their home because of my actions. I'd justified every action by saying Tommy deserved it, that I was just revealing the truth, that the consequences were his responsibility, not mine. But that was the same kind of moral rationalization that allowed Tommy to betray me in the first place. He'd probably told himself that he deserved to control the company, that I was holding him back, that what he was doing was justified. We were both people who'd been willing to destroy others to get what we wanted. The only difference was that he'd wanted money and control, while I'd wanted revenge. But the willingness to hurt innocent people in pursuit of our goals, that was the same. We were both monsters, just different kinds. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon in my 10th month of unemployment. I was at a Whole Foods in Coconut Grove, doing my weekly shopping, when I saw Emma, Tommy's younger daughter. She was 9 years old now, walking through the store with Lisa. I ducked behind an aisle display, not wanting them to see me. But I watched them. Emma was asking her mother about something, and Lisa was shaking her head, putting an item back on the shelf. I realized they were price-checking, being careful about what they bought. Lisa was working full-time as a teacher now, trying to support 2 daughters on a single income plus whatever minimal child support Tommy could provide. They were struggling financially because of Tommy's collapse, a collapse I'd engineered. Emma said something to her mother, and Lisa bent down to give her a hug. I saw Emma's face. She looked sad, tired. This little girl had lost her father, lost the comfortable life she'd known, lost the stability of her family. And I was responsible for that, at least partially. Tommy had created the situation by having an affair and stealing from his company. But I'd chosen to expose it publicly, to maximize damage, to ensure that his family would suffer along with him. I left the Whole Foods without buying anything. I sat in my car in the parking lot, and for the first time in 10 months, I cried. Not angry tears or frustrated tears, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere I didn't know existed. I cried for Emma and her sister. I cried for Lisa. I cried for Tommy's parents. I cried for all the Skyline employees who'd lost their jobs when the company filed for bankruptcy. I cried for the investors who'd lost their money, and I cried for myself, for what I'd become, for the 10 months I'd wasted, for the person I used to be before revenge consumed me. I'd wanted to destroy Tommy, and I'd succeeded. But I'd also destroyed part of myself in the process. The David who'd started Skyline Properties with genuine excitement and optimism, that person was gone. In his place was someone bitter, obsessive, capable of cruelty I'd never imagined myself capable of. Sitting in that parking lot, I made a decision. I needed help. Professional help, because I'd crossed into territory I couldn't navigate alone. The revenge was complete. Tommy had nothing left to take. But if I didn't address what this obsession had done to me, I'd spend the rest of my life trapped in this darkness. I found a therapist the following Monday. Dr. Sarah Chen specialized in trauma, PTSD, and what she called complicated grief and anger responses. Our first session was supposed to be an intake appointment, just getting to know each other, establishing a baseline. It lasted 2.5 hours because once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I told her everything. Tommy's betrayal, the fake FBI investigation, losing the company, and then the 10 months I'd spent systematically destroying him. I told her about exposing the affair to his entire social network, about sending the embezzlement evidence to everyone in the real estate community, about feeding information to competitors and contractors to accelerate Skyline's collapse, about reporting him to actual federal authorities. Dr. Chen listened without judgment. When I finished, she asked one question. Did destroying Tommy's life make you feel better about losing yours? I opened my mouth to say yes, but I couldn't, because the honest answer was no. Destroying Tommy had given me temporary satisfaction, moments of vindication, but it hadn't healed the wound of his betrayal. It hadn't restored what I'd lost. It had only created new wounds, new problems, new pain. Over the next 6 months, I saw Dr. Chen twice a week. We worked through the trauma of the betrayal, but we also worked through my response to that trauma. She helped me understand that revenge and justice aren't the same thing, that seeking proportional consequences for wrongdoing is different from trying to inflict maximum suffering. She helped me see that my obsession with destroying Tommy had been, in some ways, easier than dealing with my own pain and rebuilding my own life. Revenge gave me purpose, direction, a sense of control. Actually processing the betrayal, grieving the loss of the company and the friendship, and starting over, that was much harder work that required facing uncomfortable truths about myself. Dr. Chen had me write a letter to Tommy that I would never send. In it, I had to articulate what his betrayal had cost me, but also what my revenge had cost. Writing that letter was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because it required acknowledging things I'd been avoiding. My revenge hadn't just hurt Tommy. It had hurt his daughters, his wife, his parents, innocent investors, Skyline employees. And it had hurt me by consuming a year of my life and transforming me into someone I didn't recognize. Through therapy, I also started dealing with the underlying issues that made me so vulnerable to Tommy's betrayal in the first place. My childhood poverty and my parents' financial struggles had created in me an intense fear of ending up like them. My self-worth was tied almost entirely to professional success and financial security. When Tommy took the company, he didn't just take my business. He took the thing I'd built my entire identity around. Dr. Chen helped me understand that I needed to build an identity that wasn't solely dependent on external achievement. I needed to find value in myself beyond what I'd accomplished professionally. This was transformative, but also terrifying. It meant questioning everything I'd believed about success, worth, and what mattered in life. Around month 14, 16 months after Tommy's betrayal, I finally started rebuilding my professional life. Not in real estate, though. That door was closed, at least in Miami, where my name was now associated with Skyline's dramatic collapse. Even though I'd been forced out, even though Tommy had betrayed me, People in the industry remembered me as one of the two founders of a company that had failed spectacularly. Instead, I took a job doing financial analysis for a large commercial real estate firm in Atlanta. It meant relocating, starting over in a city where nobody knew my history. The position paid $68,000 a year, barely half what I'd been making at Skyline and a fraction of what I'd been worth as a partner. But it was honest work, and it gave me structure and purpose beyond obsessing over someone else's downfall. The move to Atlanta was healing in ways I didn't expect. Away from Miami, I wasn't constantly reminded of Skyline, of Tommy, of the revenge campaign. I could focus on building a new life without those ghosts haunting every street corner. I found a new therapist in Atlanta and continued the work I'd started with Dr. Chen. I started taking care of my physical health again. I joined a gym, started running, began cooking actual meals instead of living on takeout and delivery. The 28 pounds I'd lost during the revenge campaign came back, but this time as muscle instead of the stress-depleted weight I'd carried before. My resting heart rate dropped back to normal. The chest pains disappeared. I started sleeping through the night for the first time in over a year. I made new friends through the gym and through work, people who knew nothing about Skyline Properties or Tommy Rodriguez. These friendships were different from my relationship with Tommy had been. More balanced, more bounded, more healthy. I learned to trust people again, but with better boundaries and clearer awareness of warning signs. After 2 years in Atlanta, I was promoted to senior financial analyst with a salary of $94,000. It still wasn't what I'd been making at Skyline, and it certainly wasn't the kind of wealth I'd been building as a partner. But it was stable, and I was earning it through my own work rather than through destroying someone else. I started dating again, cautiously. The first few relationships didn't work out. I was still learning how to be emotionally available, how to be vulnerable without being naive, how to trust without ignoring red flags. But I was making progress. I was learning that it was possible to be careful without being consumed by fear and suspicion. 3 years after leaving Miami, I was in a place I never thought I'd reach again. Genuinely okay. Not perfectly healed, not wealthy and successful like I'd once been, but stable, functional, and building something positive. The bitterness that had consumed me was fading, replaced by something that felt like acceptance, maybe even wisdom. Now, 5 years after Tommy's betrayal and 4 years after completing my revenge, I want to share what I've learned about revenge and why I'm telling this story despite how it makes me look. Because here's the thing. Revenge worked exactly as I'd planned. I destroyed Tommy's life, took everything from him, made him suffer. And it was still a terrible mistake. First, revenge doesn't heal betrayal. It just creates new wounds. Tommy's betrayal hurt because I'd trusted him completely, and he'd violated that trust for his own gain. But my revenge didn't undo that violation or restore the trust. It just added new pain. The guilt of knowing I'd hurt innocent people. The shame of becoming someone capable of such calculated cruelty. The emptiness of realizing that destroying someone else's life didn't make mine better. Second, revenge requires constant energy and attention that could be spent rebuilding. I spent 10 months obsessed with Tommy's downfall. 10 months where I could have been looking for new opportunities, developing new skills, building new relationships, creating new sources of meaning and value. Instead, I was stuck in the past, focused on destruction rather than creation. By the time I started rebuilding, I was 18 months behind where I could have been. Third, revenge doesn't stay contained. I told myself I was just targeting Tommy, but that was a lie I needed to believe to justify my actions. In reality, my revenge hurt his daughters, devastated his wife, crushed his elderly parents, cost innocent employees their jobs, and caused investors to lose money they'd worked hard to accumulate. None of those people had betrayed me. None of them deserved what happened to them. But I'd decided their suffering was acceptable collateral damage. Fourth, revenge changes you in ways that persist long after it's complete. I became obsessive, secretive, manipulative, and cruel. I learned that I was capable of hurting innocent people if I convinced myself the cause was justified. Those discoveries about myself don't just disappear once the revenge is done. I still have to live with knowing what I'm capable of, knowing that under the right circumstances, I can become a monster. Fifth, and maybe most importantly, revenge is fundamentally different from justice. Justice would have been taking Tommy to court, pursuing legal remedies for his fraud and theft, ensuring he faced appropriate legal consequences. That would have been hard, expensive, and uncertain, but it would have been proportional and bounded by law. My revenge was unlimited, personal, and designed to cause maximum suffering. That's not justice. That's just cruelty dressed up in the language of deservingness. The financial cost was staggering, too. I spent approximately $400,000 over 10 months on legal fees, investigations, living expenses, and the various costs of executing my revenge. That money, almost half of what I received from the buyout, was spent on destruction rather than rebuilding. If I'd invested that money wisely and focused on finding new opportunities, I'd be in a much better financial position today. Looking back with the clarity that comes from therapy and time, I can see what I should have done instead of pursuing revenge. These lessons are what I hope anyone watching this video will take away. Because if my mistakes can help even one person make better choices, maybe some good can come from this story. I should have immediately hired a good attorney and pursued legal remedies. Tommy had committed actual crimes: forgery, fraud, embezzlement. Instead of spending 10 months orchestrating his destruction, I should have spent that time building a legal case and letting the justice system handle it. Yes, it would have been slow and uncertain, but it would have been the right way to seek accountability. I should have started therapy immediately after the betrayal, not after completing my revenge. The betrayal was traumatic, and I needed professional help processing that trauma in healthy ways. If I'd done that, maybe a therapist could have helped me understand that revenge was a symptom of my pain, not a solution to it. Maybe I could have dealt with the hurt without becoming someone I didn't recognize. I should have focused immediately on rebuilding my professional life. The company was gone, but my skills and experience weren't. I could have looked for opportunities in other markets, leveraged my expertise in different ways, started building something new. Instead, I wasted 10 months in obsessive destruction and then struggled to find my footing because I'd been out of the industry for so long. I should have maintained my relationships and support system. Instead of isolating myself to hide what I was doing, I should have leaned on friends and family for support during a difficult time. Isolation made everything worse. It allowed my thoughts to spiral, gave me too much time to obsess, and left me without anyone to provide reality checks on my increasingly dark plans. Most importantly, I should have accepted that Tommy's betrayal was about him, not about me. He didn't betray me because I deserved it, or because I'd failed somehow. He betrayed me because he valued money and control more than integrity and friendship. That's a reflection of his character, not mine. But I internalized the betrayal as evidence that I'd been weak or naive, and I tried to prove my strength through revenge. Real strength would have been walking away and building something better. The path I actually took, revenge, obsession, destruction, it felt powerful in the moment. It felt like I was taking control, evening the score, getting justice. But it was all an illusion. The only power revenge gave me was the power to hurt people, including myself. And that's the kind of power that destroys you from the inside out. It's been 5 years since Tommy's betrayal. I'm now 38 years old, still living in Atlanta, and working as a director of financial planning for a major commercial real estate firm. My salary is $132,000, not what I was making as a partner at Skyline, but respectable and earned through honest work. I have a small but genuine circle of friends. I'm in a relationship with someone I care about deeply, and we're talking about moving in together. My life is stable, functional, even good in many ways, but I still carry the weight of what I did. I still have dreams sometimes about Emma and her sister, about Lisa struggling financially, about the Skyline employees who lost their jobs. I know that my actions contributed to real suffering for innocent people, and that knowledge doesn't fade just because time passes. I don't know exactly where Tommy is now. I've deliberately avoided looking him up, stopped checking court records, stopped monitoring what happened to him after the bankruptcy. That's been part of my recovery, letting go of my obsessive need to know every detail of his life. But I heard through the grapevine about 2 years ago that he'd moved to Texas, was working in some kind of construction-related business, and had limited visitation with his daughters. I hope he's okay. That probably sounds strange after everything I did to destroy him, but it's true. I don't wish him continued suffering. I hope he's learned from what happened. Hope he's working to be a better father to his daughters. Hope he's found some kind of peace. Not because he deserves it. I'm not sure either of us deserves peace after what we've done. But because more suffering doesn't serve any purpose. The question people always ask when I share this story is whether I forgive Tommy. The honest answer is that I don't think about it in terms of forgiveness anymore. What Tommy did was wrong. He committed fraud, destroyed our partnership, stole from investors, betrayed everyone who trusted him. Those are facts that don't change whether I forgive him or not. But what I've learned is that forgiveness isn't really about the other person. It's about releasing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. It's about choosing not to let someone's past actions continue to control your present emotional state. In that sense, I suppose I have forgiven Tommy, because I've stopped allowing his betrayal to define my life. The harder question is whether I've forgiven myself, because my actions, the revenge campaign, the collateral damage to innocent people, the months wasted on destruction, those are harder to come to terms with. I tell myself I was traumatized, that I wasn't thinking clearly, that I was reacting to a terrible betrayal. And all of that is true. But it doesn't excuse what I did. I'm still working on self-forgiveness. My therapist says that's a process that takes time, that I need to acknowledge my mistakes without being consumed by shame, that I need to learn from what I did wrong without defining myself entirely by those actions. Some days that feels possible. Other days, the weight of what I did to Tommy's daughters, to Lisa, to innocent employees and investors feels like something I'll carry forever. If you're watching this video because someone has betrayed you, because you're feeling that burning desire for revenge that I felt, I want to speak directly to you for a moment. Because I understand what you're going through better than most people ever could. The betrayal you experienced is real. The pain you're feeling is legitimate. The anger, the desire to make them pay, the obsessive thoughts about revenge, all of that is a normal human response to being betrayed by someone you trusted. You're not weak for feeling this way. You're not crazy for wanting them to suffer the way you're suffering. These are natural reactions to an unnatural situation. But I'm begging you, don't go down the path I went down. Don't spend months or years of your life obsessed with destroying someone else. Don't let the person who hurt you continue to hurt you by consuming your thoughts, your time, your energy, your potential for happiness. Don't become the kind of person who's willing to hurt innocent people to get at your target. Revenge feels satisfying when you're planning it. It feels powerful when you're executing it. But I'm telling you from experience that satisfaction is temporary, and the cost is permanent. The person you become in pursuit of revenge, the time you lose, the collateral damage you cause. You can't undo those things once they're done. Instead, I'm asking you to do something much harder. Focus on healing yourself rather than hurting them. Seek therapy from someone who specializes in trauma and betrayal. Build a support system of people who can help you process what happened. Pursue legal remedies if appropriate, but through proper channels. Most importantly, start rebuilding your life as soon as possible. The person who betrayed you took something from you. Your trust, your financial security, your peace of mind, whatever it was. Don't give them more by wasting months or years of your life on revenge. Don't let them take your future in addition to whatever they already took from your past. Build something better instead. Prove to yourself that you're more than what happened to you. That you can overcome betrayal without becoming a betrayer yourself. Show yourself that you're stronger than the person who hurt you. Not because you can destroy them, but because you can rebuild yourself. That's the path I wish I'd taken. That's the advice I wish someone had given me 5 years ago. And if sharing my mistakes helps even one person make better choices than I did, then maybe something good can come from the worst period of my life. The title of this story is The Shadow of Success, and I chose that deliberately. Because success casts a shadow. The fear of losing it, the people who envy it, the relationships that become complicated when money and power are involved. Tommy and I built something successful together, but that success created the conditions for betrayal. And when the betrayal happened, my response created its own shadows. I've spent 5 years thinking about what happened, analyzing every decision, trying to understand where things went wrong. And here's what I've concluded. Both Tommy and I made the same fundamental mistake. We let external measures of success become more important than internal measures of integrity. Tommy was willing to betray his partner and commit fraud to get control of a valuable company. I was willing to hurt innocent people and waste a year of my life to get revenge. We were both chasing shadows, him chasing the shadow of sole ownership and control, me chasing the shadow of vindication and power. And in chasing those shadows, we both lost sight of what actually matters: relationships, integrity, peace of mind, the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and feel okay with who you are. I'm sharing this story because I think there's value in honesty about the reality of revenge. Our culture glorifies revenge in movies and TV shows. The protagonist gets their vengeance and feels satisfied, vindicated, at peace. But that's fiction. In reality, revenge is messy, consuming, and ultimately hollow. It promises healing but delivers only temporary satisfaction followed by lasting regret. If you take away anything from this story, let it be this: the person who betrayed you has already taken enough from you. Don't give them more by letting their actions define your future. Don't waste your time, your energy, your potential for happiness on revenge. Build something better instead. Heal instead of hurt. Create instead of destroy. I can't undo what I did to Tommy, to his family, to the innocent people caught in the crossfire. I have to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. But I can use my experience to help others make better choices. And if this story prevents even one person from going down the same dark path I did, then maybe some good can come from my mistakes. Thank you for watching this video. I know it was long and heavy and uncomfortable, but I think these are the conversations we need to have. Honest discussions about betrayal, revenge, forgiveness, and the real costs of our choices. If you found value in this story, please like and subscribe. And if you're going through something similar, please consider reaching out to a therapist or counselor. You don't have to handle this alone. Take care of yourselves. Choose healing over revenge. Build something better than what was taken from you. And remember, the shadow of success is real, but it doesn't have to define you. You can step out of the shadow and into the light.